Sarah. My married name is Sarah Louise Talbot. I was born and raised in the Chicago suburb of Oak Park and have an older sister named Elizabeth. At 27 years old, when the story begins, I was 5 feet 6 inches tall, had brown hair, and a slim, well-toned body. In the mirror, I saw a pleasantly attractive woman. Physically, I suppose my best features were and still are my breasts. Cow dee. Rather, my girls have strong B-cups and are perfectly proportioned to the rest of their bodies. My parents were and remain middle class and strictly conservative in all matters socially and religiously. This figures heavily in the first part of my story and in my teenage years, when my sister was dating a very cute high school student named Joe Benson. No one told me what was happening, but in the late spring many doors were slammed, tears were shed, doctors were visited, and there was an angry silence. Then one day Mom and Beth went off to parts unknown and Dad sat me down at the kitchen table to talk. Beth seemed to have violated my parents' moral standards by allowing Joe to have unprotected sex with her, and was now 5 months pregnant. She gave birth to a child and gave him up for adoption. Like most younger sisters, I fought with my older sibling most of the time, but deep down I loved her and thought she was really being bullied. However, I remained silent and vowed to be a good daughter and avoid the moral wrath of my parents. It turned out to be easier than I expected because Beth refused to give up her baby, told my parents to fuck off, and moved to Wisconsin to live with a distant aunt who took her and her baby. Now I was the only daughter, and I was practically kept away from boys. My parents never mentioned Beth's name, and the only contact I had with her was through the occasional secret mail passed through my grandparents. Both my parents tirelessly insisted that I remain pure and innocent, unlike my bitch sister. In the spring of my senior year, my luck finally began to change. Earlier that year, we had a new minister at our church, and he happened to have a son who was in my class. His name was Eric Hansen, and he was a real dream. In public, he was a holy scripture, a respectful parental magician. In private, he was a smoker, a drinker, and a sexual predator. All the parents absolutely trusted him, and all the schoolgirls who attended church fought for him. Eric was indeed very clever, and for some reason he decided to try to date me, the uncontrollable princess. I think he took me on for a special challenge, or maybe to win a bet. On the Sunday after my 18th birthday, he called my father and asked if he could come over to his house to discuss an important matter. 15 minutes later, he was on the porch ringing the bell with a bouquet of flowers for my mother, a white rose for me, and for my dad he had 20 minutes of enlightened understanding of his father's inspiring sermon that morning. By the time he finished, they weren't just eating out of his hands. They were begging to lick up the crumbs and polish his halo. When he finally got to the real reason for his visit and asked permission to take me to the prom, they, of course, said yes. Eric was a typical two-faced person. To the adult world, he was perceived as just a step below holiness. He was known for answering adults' questions by opening the dog-eared Bible he always carried with him and quoting some obscure psalm. He would then bless the brother or sister and go about his business, leaving them scratching their heads. For the girls at my high school, he was the ultimate bad boy, and I invited him to my prom. Coincidentally, my 18th birthday fell on the weekend before my May prom, and when Eric suggested we get to know each other a little better before the big event, I jumped at the opportunity. I invited Eric to a family birthday party, and he was an expected hit, helping my mom with the catering and my dad with the grill while regaling them with humorous church gossip. When he asked me to go for a ride as the party was ending, my dad almost put me in the car. The drive took us to the notorious kissing alley, and along the way we had a surprisingly mature conversation. The most striking moment was the following. "Sarah, I want you to know that I think you are the most beautiful girl in your senior year. It's a pity that your parents didn't allow you to date before, but I'm glad that I'll be your first." I'm flattered, but I want to be honest with you, Eric. I'm very excited to date you, but there are a couple of things you need to know. It won't be a surprise to you that I haven't had sex yet, so you should know a thing or two about being gentle the first time we have sex. Secondly, I have a lot to catch up on, and I'm glad to do it with you. Thirdly, condoms are a must because my sister got pregnant and gave birth. I don't want this to happen to me. I unbuckled my seat belt and slid next to him. I kissed his cheek and spoke into his ear. For tonight, I just want to ask one thing. Who is this, honey? Can you be truly gentle for the first time? Your wish is my command, sweet lady. True to his word, Eric made me feel good, slowly and very gently. Prom and the entire summer before we left for college was a dream come true. My parents had no idea what was going on, but I was in love. To be clear, I was in love with sex, but Eric, I'm not sure about that. If I had taken the time to get to know him, I would have realized that he is shallow, unreliable, lazy, and really not very smart. In short, a real idiot in a beautiful package. But oh, that idiot. While I was faithful at the university, he slept with eligible freshman girls in Lafayette. When I came to visit, he was good at hiding his indiscretions, but by Christmas I knew we were done. Surprisingly, our breakup was not terrible, but it was sad. In January, I returned to the University of Champaign with two goals: to get serious about my studies and to find a new, perhaps healthier, love partner. I achieved the first goal, but had no luck with the second. The summer between my freshman and sophomore years was boring, but I took extra shifts at the municipal pool as a lifeguard and ended the summer with a great tan. Once I returned to university in the fall, my luck changed. A nice guy borrowed my pen from my English literature class, and we struck up a conversation. He invited me for coffee, and we immediately hit it off. We seemed to agree on most of the important issues of the time, and on those we disagreed with, we managed to listen to each other respectfully. More importantly, there was physical chemistry between us. Perhaps Jay is the one. Jay. My name is Jeffrey Charles Talbot, Jay to my friends. I was born and raised with two younger brothers in River Forest, Illinois, in a family of professionals. I think I was a pretty average kid, but I showed a talent for computers, programming, and, oddly enough, athletics. I wasn't particularly fast, but I had good endurance, which is why I received athletic honors in spring track and field and fall cross country. Over time, I began to exercise harder, increased my lung capacity, and my sudden height as a teenager turned me into a lean, leggy 6'3" runner. By the time I graduated high school, I had competed in 3 state championships, set several records, and was heavily recruited by Big Ten university track programs. When the University of Illinois offered me full tuition, I immediately accepted. They needed help with their track program, but more importantly, they had the best computer science department in the Big Ten. My personal life was also going well. In the spring and fall, weekends were busy with travel to competitions, which could affect romantic relationships. However, if you date mostly cheerleaders and track girls, this problem goes away. Our school often traveled to competitions outside of Chicago, so the boys and girls teams shared the same bus for long trips. Since our coaches were also dating, they were somewhat inattentive to how the guys and girls bonded on long bus rides in the dark. By my junior year, I had developed a serious crush on a slender blonde runner named Rachel Paulson. Neither of us wanted to get too carried away at this stage of our lives, but nature took over, and we became an exclusive couple and then exchanged class rings. We had to work hard on our endurance in winter and summer, but we had plenty of time for private meetings in the basement, and after our 18th birthdays we became, as they say, intimate. It should be noted that we were cautiously intimate. Neither of us wanted to bring a new life into this world, and frankly, I think neither of us were ready for a lifelong commitment. We were really attracted to each other, but I think we both knew we had to leave something unresolved because the future was too uncertain. Our hesitation was justified when we were both offered full scholarships to different universities. She got a great offer from the University of Southern California, and I got a great offer from the University of Illinois, in my home state. We hugged, shed a few tears, and reluctantly parted ways as particularly good friends. We met only once during the Christmas holidays. She said she met a nice guy, and they were almost at the with benefits stage. He was supposed to come to her after Christmas for the New Year holidays. I wished her all the best, and we hugged and kissed one last time. Good girl, I'll miss her a lot. My first year in Champaign was filled with a busy computer science curriculum and working with distance runners in the athletic department. I chose the University of Illinois for several reasons. Firstly, it was a great university with a strong computer science department. They gave me full tuition if I could make the team, and lastly, my results were better than their top runners. Therefore, it was not surprising when I was chosen to be part of the team for the first autumn cross-country race. In my first Big Ten competition, I showed a decent result, finishing just behind my senior mentor on our team. At the second competition, I overtook him, and after that my only rivals were the guys from other teams. The girls from the sports department noticed my status, good physique, relatively clear skin, and showed their availability. I accepted the invitation of several of them and fit them into my schedule when I was not busy with competitions, training, and intense studies. The classes were challenging and full of Asian students. Although many of them were truly intelligent, the language barrier prevented many of them from reaching their full potential. I finished my first semester with a 3.5 GPA, which is the equivalent of an A in the University of Illinois system. Not as bad as I thought. I finished the spring semester slightly better in terms of GPA, studied indoors 6 days a week, and continued to enjoy my interactions with energetic female students, none of whom seemed to be looking for any kind of commitment. Over the summer, I took a job at a university helping run the high school athletics program. This gave me a great opportunity to keep in shape, work on my tan, my communication skills in bed, and my conversational Mandarin. One of my summer girlfriends was Chinese and had already been studying at the University of Illinois for 6 years, so her English was quite passable. She was a sexy babe, and we had a great time both in and out of bed. She was probably a foreign spy, but we had fun. During the first week of my sophomore year, I met Sarah. As part of my technically oriented curriculum, I still needed to take some humanities courses, so I enrolled in an American literature course. As luck would have it, on the first day of class, I found myself sitting next to a very pretty brunette who I charmed by asking to lend me a pen. I don't know if it was my tracksuit, my good physique, my charm, my insightful questions about Emerson, or my aftershave, but she agreed to have coffee with me in the student center. By the time we left for the afternoon, I was mesmerized. I called her in the evening, and we talked for more than an hour, and most importantly, we checked the schedule. I had a competition against a non-conference opponent on Saturday afternoon, and she said she would come. I finished first and got our first kiss. Wow, Sarah. The day I showed up for Jay's first race was a beautiful, warm September day, and the runners were just lining up when I arrived. Jay saw me and waved as he waited at the starting line. A shot rang out, and this mass of runners exploded past me. I caught a glimpse of him as he rushed past, and his physical form literally shocked me. He had long, slender legs and a huge chest for his build. His face was red from tension, and he took huge gulps of air. And so he ran past, and I watched his cute buttocks recede into the distance. From time to time, a group of runners could be seen going up and down the hills of the course. The last time I saw the group stretched out into a long, thin line. Less than 30 minutes later, Jay appeared ahead of everyone. He finished a full 10 lengths ahead of his nearest rival, who happened to be his teammate. The University of Illinois placed first, second, fourth, sixth, and seventh for a total of 20 points, a complete victory. As Jay congratulated his teammates, he came up to me and said, "Hey, pretty girl, do you have a kiss for the winner?" My first thought was, he thinks I'm beautiful, and my second was, of course I have a kiss for you. And with these words, I grabbed his cheeks, held his ears, and looked for his tonsils. He was sweating from exertion, but I didn't care as he pressed me against his body. When we finally reluctantly parted ways, he asked me to wait for him at the sports complex. This Saturday was the best first date of my life. I waited for him with other families and girlfriends in a specially designated area, and 20 minutes later Jay came out, fresh as new, and looking like $1,000,000. The rest of the day passed in a blur for me. All I remember is that he held my hand, and we wandered all over campus, talking and talking. By 5 p.m., we were at the student center, and he asked me if I had plans for the evening. I replied that I hoped to spend it together. To this, he simply smiled at me and pulled me in for a kiss. This time it was soft and special, and it gave me goosebumps all over my body. Since then, we have been inseparable. I really like this guy, and it wasn't just the obvious sexual chemistry between us. He was smart and seemed very disciplined in all aspects of his life. Combined with the fact that he was sexy and kind, it was a miracle that no one had caught him yet. We also had the conversation that all couples should have about their past romantic relationships. I told him about my strict parents, my sister's mistake, and my relationship with the preacher's son at the prom. I admit I focused on the church side of our dates and downplayed the romantic one. He spoke candidly to me about his high school crush and his university dates. Our sex life progressed quite quickly, and within 2 weeks we were taking advantage of his roommate's dropout and rolling around on his dorm bed. Our first time was after Jay returned from the Big Ten championships, and we didn't see each other for 6 days. At that time, it seemed like an eternity, and we were literally burning on his bed. The passion of the moment was so strong that I barely noticed how my panties came off. We achieved the physical goal, but the level of emotional attachment we felt far exceeded the physical one. We were connected to each other in a way we had never experienced before. That night, as he held me in his arms and we dozed together, our bodies still intertwined, I felt completely loved and was absolutely sure that I would never be separated from this wonderful man. Jay. After Sarah and I made love for the first time, our lives changed dramatically. We were no longer two separate individuals, there was now only us. On New Year's Eve, I told her that I see us married with lots of kids, and she didn't mind. We didn't get officially engaged until 2 years later at Christmas, and the wedding was planned for June. Overall, studying at university was a wonderful experience for both of us. Sarah and I both graduated in June, she in elementary education and I in computer engineering. Cross-country benefited me greatly. I received a free 4-year education and a training regimen that will stay with me for the rest of my life. I was heavily recruited by tech giants in the Midwest, but I decided to stay in the graduate program for at least 2 more years to complete my master's degree. We were in no financial need, as Sarah immediately took a job as a teacher, and I was able to work part-time as a teaching assistant and assistant cross-country coach. The next 2 years were difficult, but overall good as we strengthened our marriage. Living together was fun, and there was hardly a day when we didn't have some form of sex. I think we have initiated every horizontal and most vertical surface with some form of sexual activity. The wild thing was that we were both initiators and innovators. Our days during the school year were busy for both of us, but our nights were filled with lust, experimentation, and love. We just couldn't get enough of each other. I thought we had an amazing sex life before marriage, but that 2-year period made our courtship feel like kindergarten. After receiving my master's degree, I was offered a paid position as an assistant at the research center. The salary wasn't very high, but it allowed me to work on my PhD for free and still do cross-country on the weekends. 4 years at the center flew by unnoticed. Now I was Dr. Talbot, making 6 figures and constantly being bombarded with offers to move to Silicon Valley. Sarah and I talked about it a lot, but we were happy here in Champaign. We had lots of friends, lots of university-related activities, and Sarah was now deputy head teacher at her school. We also started talking about starting a family. We'd had this conversation before, but Sarah was approaching her 28th birthday, and that old biological clock was starting to tick. Buying a house was also on the horizon if we were going to stay here. Sarah. Being married to Jay was absolutely wonderful. We were madly in love, and the sex we had was absolutely insane. That two people could find so many different ways to please each other just amazed me. I was happy with my job, but found the first summer holidays to be boring as Jay was so busy with his school schedule. Our apartment complex had a nice pool, so I spent most of the summer lying around and working on my tan. Jay liked playing with his tan lines, but I started to feel guilty about just laying around, so I decided to go to summer school. Over the next 5 years, I was able to earn a master's degree in school administration and soon became an assistant principal, so I was completely satisfied professionally and sexually. I was most concerned about the issue of children. One side of me wanted children, and the other side loved the job and sexual freedom I had. This sets the stage for the spring email I received announcing my 10-year high school reunion. Since I was the class secretary, I automatically got on the planning committee if I wanted. And guess who else? Yes, good old Eric, because he was class president, of course. Suddenly, thoughts of him filled my mind, and I slammed my laptop shut. That night, Jay unknowingly became the recipient of my sexual frustration. I met him at the door ready for sex. The next day I was fine at school, although I had a dull ache from last night's sex. Then, mid-afternoon, I received an email from Eric himself. This was the first contact with him since I found out about his infidelity many years ago. Jay and I regularly meet on Friday nights for a fish fry, sometimes with friends and sometimes just the two of us. Jay. One spring day, I was walking into the athletic office when there was no one I was supposed to see but Rachel Paulson. "Jay," she exclaimed, "I didn't know you were still involved with the university." This meeting ended with a cup of coffee in the dining room and a long conversation. It's been 11 years since we broke up. She attended college at the University of Southern California, and her parents moved to the San Francisco area. She did very well in the track program there and was nationally ranked, and I told her that I followed her career until she graduated. She also followed my career through graduation, but didn't know that I went on to get my PhD at Illinois, and that I was still volunteering as a coach mentor for both boys and girls. When I asked about her marital status, she became a little quiet and then said that she married her college boyfriend and that he paid his way through school by committing to ROTC and enlisted immediately after graduation. After his first deployment to the South, his unit was called to Iraq, and he did not survive his first deployment. She paused for a moment, and I instinctively reached out and grabbed her hand. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes and thanked me, squeezing me back. Then she let go of my hand and in a firm voice continued to tell me about her 5-year-old daughter, who will be starting kindergarten next fall. I learned that she would be attending my wife's school and told her it was a high-quality educational environment. Apparently, she returned to her alma mater while her husband was deployed and took a coaching job. She had a lot of friends there, and they gave me a lot of support when her husband was killed, and then she gave birth. She continued to work at the school until the head women's cross-country coach position opened up at I. We talked for a long time until she realized that she would be late for the meeting and would have to run. I gave her my numbers and invited her and her daughter to come over for dinner on Friday night and bring her daughter with them. We parted with a smile and a light pat on the cheek. That evening, I told Sarah about meeting Rachel and inviting her and her daughter to dinner. I didn't think anything would be a problem because we often had business colleagues and coaches over for dinner. However, in Rachel's case, Sarah asked why. I told her because she is a friend, a fellow coach, and the mother of a 5-year-old who will be attending your school next year. Sarah replied, "Because she's your ex-girlfriend from HS, that's why." I advised Sarah to focus on the ex and not worry. She's just a friend coming into a new environment with a small child, and I wanted her to feel welcome. The dinner went well. Sarah tried her best to be hospitable. Sarah and Rachel didn't become best friends, but at least they weren't enemies. However, the biggest hit of the night was Rachel's daughter Megan. She was an adorable little girl, and we enjoyed her wit, poise, and laughter. It was early in the evening due to the age of the daughters, and after they left, Sarah said to me, "I'm sorry I was angry with Rachel. She's a really good woman. I understand why you dated her back in HS. The daughter is cute too. I hope we can create something as good as her in the future." To this I said, taking Sarah in my arms, "Then let's practice a little." Over the next month to 6 weeks, I met with Rachel regularly, mostly at weekend running events, but sometimes on campus when I came from the research center to check on team practice. She was always friendly but reserved when we met or had a cup of coffee. When I asked her if anything was bothering her, She frankly told me that seeing me after all these years had reignited emotions in her that she had long forgotten. She was afraid to say anything because she didn't want to evoke no emotion. I thanked her for her honesty and shared that I also felt like there was something going on between us. After all, we were lovers, and if not for the choice of college and her parents moving, we might have ended up together today. We parted that day with a feeling of sadness, but also with the firm knowledge that we would have to end our relationship before things could move forward. Sarah. Seeing Eric's name in the email brought back memories, all sexual ones, and I felt a little guilty and embarrassed. I could have taken control again, but then the personal emails from Eric started. At first, they looked innocent and were the usual nonsense about where time had gone and general details of the July reunion. These messages were from his work computer, but I soon began receiving a lot more personal mail from his Hotmail account. In the first message, he apologized profusely and sincerely for ruining our relationship. He went on and on about how much I meant to him and how much he missed just talking to me. I think it was his apology that prompted me to respond to his message, and that's where I failed. We soon began a dialogue that quickly became overtly sexual. At that moment, I didn't really think I was cheating on Jay. I just forgot to tell him about my new buddy via email. However, I appreciate that if Jay ever sees this letter, I will have a lot of explaining to do. My solution, and the second step of my scam, was to delete all Hotmail mail from my email account. In my more rational world, I mentioned to Jay that I was on the planning committee for the Oak Park 10th reunion because I was the class secretary. I added that I might have to make a couple of trips home for meetings over the next few months. Since he was sometimes away on weekends for cross-country and track meets in his role as assistant coach, perhaps we could agree that we would be gone that same weekend. A couple of days later, Jay gave me dates for his away weekends for the next 6 months, and lo and behold, he had a conflict with my reunion. When I told him that I would miss the event, he insisted that I be there, especially since I was the class teacher. Eric used his influence as class president to organize 2 pre-committee meetings when Jay had retreats, and we were ready. At that moment, I really didn't think seriously about what was going on here, didn't think about what was happening. Of course, I'm not cheating. I love my husband madly, and this with Eric is just a little innocent flirting. I didn't think anything had changed in my relationship with Jay. We continued our Friday night dates and our usual lovemaking and passionate sex. And then came the first meeting of the committee to prepare for the reunion. Jay had a track meet weekend in Indiana in April, and since I had the day off from work, I drove to Chicago on Friday morning. I agreed to meet Eric for lunch at noon. We planned to socialize after lunch and then have dinner with the committee at our first meeting. I was supposed to stay with my friend Mary Beth Adams, who lived in Oak Park. Eric met me in the restaurant parking lot, and we hugged for what I thought would just be a nice friendly greeting with an old friend. But the kiss instantly took me back 10 years ago. When we finally broke apart, Eric whispered, "God, Sarah, I've been dreaming about this kiss for the last 10 years. Do you want to eat, or can we go somewhere to talk?" I think I answered, "Talk," because within minutes we were walking across the parking lot to a nearby motel. Everything was in a fog. We were already entering the room, the clothes disappeared, and I found myself on the bed. It wasn't until an hour or two later that I started to realize what I was doing and, oh God, what was going to happen to my marriage. I burst into tears and rolled away from Eric. He began to gently stroke my back and hug me, asking what happened. I think I responded something like, "I'm a cheap, cheating bitch now." "Oh dear, no," he reassured me, all the while gently stroking my body. Finally, our session ended and we showered together. After a few minutes of playing, I asked him when dinner would start. I said that I needed to pick up my suitcase and, at a minimum, fix my makeup and change clothes. Of course, we barely made it in time for dinner, but since it was held in the same restaurant nearby, we still made it on time. We agreed not to show any signs that we were a couple, and surprisingly, I think we succeeded. We all shared our stories about marriages, divorces, studies, jobs, children, houses, etc. And the evening flew by. Before we knew it, it was already 11 p.m., and we agreed to meet for breakfast at 9 a.m. at the nearby Marriott, which would also be the location of the reunion. I never got to marry Beth that night. I quietly whispered to her that she would cover for me if anyone called, but that I wanted to stay with Eric for a little while. She winked and told me to enjoy it. That night and the next morning were again full of passion, and we barely managed to make it to breakfast at 9 a.m. We actually had some stuff planned for the rest of the morning. Tasks were distributed among contacts, and all the details of the party were agreed upon. At noon, we were the guests of one of the committee members in the suburbs, where there was lunch and a swim in the pool. It was really fun meeting this group. We were friends at school, and it was nice to reconnect. Later, after lunch, Eric and I went to relax before dinner. Another dinner with the committee and an early bedtime. That night, Eric played my body like a musical instrument. Although we may have made love 9 or 10 times in the last 18 hours, he did everything to give me maximum pleasure. And then morning came. Eric was sleeping without his hind legs, and I got up and went to the bathroom. My body was covered in marks and love bites. I was completely exhausted physically and got what I dreamed of: wonderful sex with Eric. My selfish fantasy had come true, so why were tears streaming down my cheeks while I sat in my lover's bathroom? What will happen to my marriage that I thought about? Jay knows me so well that as soon as he sees me, he'll know what I've been up to. As I leaned my head back to rest in the warm water, I noticed my phone lying on the table. I stood up, picked it up, and then plunged back into the warm water. I turned it off on Friday and forgot to turn it back on. Of course, there were a lot of messages and letters, but the only one that mattered was from Jay. Hello, darling. I suspected that you turned off your phone so as not to interfere with all the important things about the homecoming, so I called your friend 4 times. She was very nice and helpful, but she couldn't seem to find you. The first time I called was Friday night, but no one answered, so I assumed you both had left. The second time was on Saturday morning, but you just left. The third time I called was on Saturday evening at 11 o'clock, but you were still not there. The fourth time was early Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, but I think you were at church. I can't wait to hear all the details about your committee meetings. By the way, I just spoke with Eric's wife. She chastised me for waking her 2 small children and told me that her slacker husband was out of town for an important interview and could not attend the committee meeting. If you suddenly meet him, you can warn him to bring flowers. Hope to see you again soon. I look forward to hearing about your weekend. With love, your husband, Jeffrey Charles Talbot. J. And then came that same weekend with the homecoming committee when I couldn't find my beloved wife. Amid a flurry of en route texts and near hysterical phone calls, Sarah arrived back in Champaign around noon on Sunday. I was dressed for a run when she walked in. She told me over and over again that nothing bad happened in Oak Park. She really was with the girls the whole time I called, and she was drinking a lot and talking about 10 years of gossip. She didn't know anything about Eric's situation. Despite what his wife said, he was in planning meetings, and they only exchanged perfunctory greetings due to their less than romantic breakup. I had known Sarah for 9 years, and this was the first time I instinctively mistrusted her words. When she tried to prove her love for me by dragging me into the bedroom, I simply held her at arm's length and said, "No, Sarah, I think I need to go for a run to clear my head." She tearfully accepted my decision, and I hurriedly walked out and ran along the campus path. Now I was in my element. When I run, I can turn off my thoughts or solve problems. Today was the day for the latter. 3 miles later, I began to sweat as I approached a familiar female figure. Instinctively, I slowed down and examined the ass that I had loved to caress 10 years ago. Rachel had clearly changed. She had a child, but her figure became even more attractive. Finally, I caught up with her, and as soon as I did, she said, "Are you enjoying the view?" "As beautiful as always." We ran together another 2 miles and came to a rest area where there were benches and drinking fountains. After I took a sip of water, I asked her to just jog a little and told her the story about Sarah to see her reaction. To my surprise, she took Sarah's side. She said that I should give her a chance because I have no evidence of infidelity, only guesses. As long as there is no clear evidence of infidelity, I must trust my wife of 7 years. If possible, do some research, especially regarding Eric, but be careful. Tell her that you trust her unconditionally and are giving her a chance. I thanked Rachel for her valuable advice, and when I got home, I hugged a worried Sarah and looked her straight in the eyes. Sarah, I love you and trust you to tell me the truth 100% about your weekend. I've never intentionally lied to you, and I can't believe you've ever lied to me. And now I would like to take up your earlier offer of some afternoon pleasures. As I finished my speech, Sarah screamed and jumped on top of me, wrapping her legs around my hips with vise-like force. Holding her buttocks, I carried us into the bedroom and threw her on the bed. Our crazy sex lasted less than 10 minutes. As we gradually cooled down, I whispered in her ear again how much I love and trust her, but added, "You know the importance I attach to loyalty. No marriage can exist without absolute trust." With these words, I kissed her and went to the shower. The hot water felt good on my tired muscles, and I was a little surprised that Sarah did not join me, as she usually did after an afternoon of pleasures in bed. Reluctantly, I turned off the water and dried myself off. When I returned to the bedroom, Sarah was curled up under the covers and said she was still a little hungover from last night and was going to get some sleep. I told her everything was fine and went into my office, booted up my laptop, and started researching information about the Oak Park homecoming and class president Eric Paulson. What bothered me was the fact that we were clearly not making love, just having wild sex. Over the next 6 weeks, I quietly observed Sarah and all her activities related to the alumni reunion. Most of the interactions with committee members and classmates took place on various social media sites, such as Facebook and Twitter. Sarah offered me her passwords so I could see the profiles of her friends and the group she was hanging out with. Since I had access to her smartphone so I could update her system and apps, I could also read all of her emails regarding the homecoming. Everything seemed innocent and decent. Our sex life during this period was fine, but something was clearly missing. Sarah seemed somewhat desperate to please me and make sure I was happy and satisfied. She even did a few uncharacteristic things like meeting me at the door wearing only high heels. As the date for the next committee meeting approached, Sarah became even more chatty about who would be there, whose job involved what, and of course, old gossip. There was too much information, and her nervousness was palpable. It was obvious to me that she was hiding something. Since her public social media and emails were clear, I needed to dig a little deeper. Sarah. I was in a real panic as I drove home from my weekend with Eric. My stupid affair with Eric could have ruined my marriage, and no sex was worth it. I loved Jay with all my heart, but somewhere deep in my subconscious, I was hiding a stupid, dirty bitch. Sex with him was fantastic, but I knew I had no future with Eric. He was angry at me for leaving so suddenly to be with my husband, but I just told him to get out of the way and ran away. What should I do now? Should I confess to Jay and beg him to forgive me or try to hide what I did? All the way to Champaign, I argued with myself and finally decided that the truth would break Jay's heart, and the only right choice would be to bury this betrayal as deeply as possible and become the best wife for him. My immediate problem was that my body was covered in evidence of my infidelity, and I couldn't just take off my clothes and run into his arms. I needed to play the role of the horny wife who missed her husband without showing too much nudity or being overzealous. I hated it, but I had a role to play to distract Jay from suspicion. What tore me most was that I truly loved Jay and would rather cut off my own hand than hurt him. He was the love of my life, and I literally couldn't live without him. I made love with Jay, sometimes passionate love, but at the core it was true love. With Eric, it was just sex without personal affection, and I had to forget it. When I got home, I rushed to Jay and told him over and over again how much I loved him and how nothing happened at the meeting. For over an hour, I begged and cried, but Jay knew me too well, and deep down I knew that he knew something was wrong. I tried maybe too hard and was devastated when he said he needed to leave and go for a run. He was gone for much longer than usual, 45 minutes, and I hoped he was okay. When he finally came back, he hugged me and broke my heart by telling me he loved me and trusted me, but I think we both knew he wasn't being completely sincere. When we hugged, what usually happened. I jumped on top of him, wrapping my legs around his waist, which was always one of our favorite positions. He could easily carry my frail body on his trained body, and in the early years of our marriage, he did this often. We lay there, breathing heavily, and then Jay jumped up and went to the shower. Normally, I would join him, and we would gently recuperate and perhaps make love after some passionate sex. Since I couldn't let him see the marks on me, I just curled up under the blanket and pretended to doze. Over the next few weeks, things gradually got better between us, or maybe I just got better at pretending. We had sex regularly, but I felt that Jay was still not sure that I was a faithful wife. That feeling of closeness we had was gone, and what we did in bed was no longer love. Luckily, I could still turn him on, especially if I met him while completely naked, except for the high heels that had become my trademark. Once my bruises, bite marks, and lover's kiss marks were gone, I celebrated by sharing it with Jay, and he reacted as any normal-blooded man would. Unfortunately, this was not how my lover would react. Another potential problem in our relationship was Rachel, Jay's ex. She was incredibly nice to me, and Jay mentioned her at least once a week. I think it was natural since he worked with her team as a volunteer assistant coach. But it bothered me because I knew everything about their past. I didn't think they were intimate, but I thought she was first in line if anything went wrong in Jay and I's marriage. I suggested that Jay resign from the reunion committee, but he said it wasn't necessary. What he actually said was, "Since you told me that I should not suspect anything about your work on the committee, why do you feel the need to leave this simple planning group?" Okay, so I continued. I shared my correspondence and social networks with him, and from time to time he took my laptop and reread boring things. All the emails were pretty bland, especially the ones from Eric. In my Hotmail, I repeatedly told him that everything was over between us. But that, of course, didn't stop him from trying. He even sent hidden photos. He was like a little child who never grew up, only now he was playing with fire and with my marriage. When the weekend of the next committee meeting arrived, I again suggested not going, but Jay sent me a reminder to keep my phone on. I would really be happy to bring back that loving side of our relationship and vowed to make it happen after this weekend. Jay left for competition Thursday afternoon, and I went to work Friday morning, then took half a day off to head to Chicagoland in the afternoon. I arrived during rush hour and checked in at 6 p.m. We had good rooms at a good price and arranged for 4 girls to share rooms. Since the 2 guys were local residents, they went to their home. Cocktails were scheduled for 6:30 and dinner for 7. At 8:30, we gathered in the conference room and compared lists of participants for 2 hours. Jay called at 10:30 while we were drinking at the bar and had a couple of minutes to discuss everyday matters. With "I love you," we said goodbye for the night. The guys had left early, and 3 of my female comrades wanted to call an Uber and go to a nightclub that they thought was trendy. 2 of the 3 were single, and the third was sneaky, so I knew there would be some unscheduled activity and couldn't afford it. So I told them I would stay to read, and we went our separate ways. I called Jay and told him I was staying in the room, that the whole group had left, and that I was going to read in bed. As soon as I hung up, a predictable message came from Eric. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." This was our last meeting, so I went to the exit we agreed on and waited. Eric pulled up in a new Buick coupe, and I quickly got in. He pulled me towards him, and I reluctantly kissed him, but then finally gave in and answered him. He then drove off and drove 6 blocks to an unnamed motel. He parked behind me, and I protested, saying that we had agreed to just talk, and that I had assumed it would be in the car. He replied, "You're welcome, honey. We have so much history, I just want to relax a little with you and have a drink. Come on, honey, this is our last time together, I promise." As stupid as it was, I believed that I could control the situation, and so I went to the room. As soon as we walked in, he started massaging the back of my shoulders. Then his hands were on my chest. The sweater is removed, then the bra. I turned in his arms and we started kissing hungrily. We were having sex when suddenly my phone rang in my bag. Oh shit, I jumped up and staggered across the room to find him and answered. Hi honey, did you miss me? You sound out of breath. I had to run from the bathroom, Jay. How was your evening? Everything is quiet here, just shuffling things around a bit and missing our Saturday night. By the way, I have another call on the line, so I'll tell you good night, dear. Good night, sweet Jay. As soon as Jay hung up, we started having sex again. Oh shit, I thought, jumping up and frantically getting dressed. While I was getting dressed, Eric was just lying on the bed, looking at me with a slight grin. I cried the whole way back to the hotel and Eric didn't say anything. He just drove up to the side entrance and dropped me off. I ran to my room and luckily my roommate wasn't there so I could take a bath and wash away my sins. As I took off my dirty clothes and plunged into the hot water, I wondered how the hell I could have been so stupid as to let this bastard sleep with me and ruin my marriage. If Jay finds out even a tenth of what I did behind his back, I will be nobody and nothing. I really screwed up big time. Eric was really just a conniving bastard, but he had some kind of power to get inside my head and then my pants. I was already in bed when my roommates returned at 2 o'clock. They were drunk, and I pretended to be asleep so as not to listen to their stories of adventures. The next morning, there was a pale breakfast at 9 o'clock and a boring meeting where we distributed tasks between us until the meeting itself. Luckily, the class vice president, another girl Eric probably had in high school, was holding a meeting because our famous president was away. Jay. After my initial suspicions about Sarah and her ex, I couldn't quite shake them off, even though she seemed to be completely open about all her homecoming matters, even going so far as to give me access to her emails. From time to time, late at night, I would go into her mailbox and reread her correspondence with the committee. Nothing but idle chatter, but then, 10 days before her next meeting, something caught my eye. One of Eric's emails to the group was sent from a Hotmail address, not his regular work one. I randomly searched Sarah's computer for other references to this address, but found nothing. Then I had another thought. What if these weren't letters? I did a global search of the drive using the words Eric and Hotmail, and boy, did I find it. Sarah saved emails from Eric as PDFs and archived them in a hidden folder. I stopped for a moment and literally asked myself if I wanted to read them, and reluctantly decided yes. I read all 87 messages and experienced an incredible range of emotions, from rage to envy, from hatred to disgust, and ended with the firm conviction that my marriage was irretrievably broken. The first group of letters consisted mostly of frivolous reminiscences about their dates and what they did and didn't do. This confirmed what Sarah had always told me, that she had a very serious boyfriend. The second group of letters was in the style of, it would be great to continue where we left off. Sarah at first flatly refused, then was neutral, then agreed only for one time. Eric was clearly a master seducer, manipulating her so skillfully. By the time of the first high school reunion, she already knew that she was going to Oak Park to sleep with him. The third group of letters were of the "it was great, but it won't happen again" category. The details in his messages were brutally honest, and Sarah never denied them in her responses. She was also very conflicted about her marriage. She clearly didn't want it to end, but she never said no to speaking again at the next committee meeting. I was in shock after reading about the end of my marriage. It was already 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had no desire to go to the bedroom and lie next to the woman who betrayed me. After saving the email archive to my laptop, I grabbed clean clothes for work the next day, wrote a note to Sarah explaining that I had a work emergency, and left the house. By 4 I was drinking coffee in the student union section, which was open 24 hours a day. I had just settled in with my laptop when suddenly someone walked in. It was the women's track team, just back from a night of racing. The girls went to get food when the coach, Rachel, noticed me and waved. After leaving the girls to finish their own breakfast, Rachel came up to me with a tray and asked if she could join me. Sure, why don't you even ask? Well, you look like your best friend just died, and I didn't want to intrude on your love life. Rachel, dear, you are probably the only person on the planet who could understand my problem and give me advice on what to do about it. I've known you most of my life and trust you more than anyone else. Wow, I don't know if I can live up to those expectations. And by the way, what about Sarah? Remember when you gave me advice a couple of weeks ago to give her a chance regarding her weekend? Well, last night I found that very proof. She saved the entire history of her secret correspondence with Eric in the form of PDF files. I spent the whole night reading them, and I was literally sick of what I read. I see no other way out but to get a divorce. When Rachel started to protest, I turned my laptop towards her and simply said, "Read it." She didn't read all the letters, but after looking at them for a few minutes, she simply looked up at me and quietly said, "Jay, honey, I think your marriage has really taken a hit. What can I do to help?" Over the next hour, I explained what I was going to do and when. She helped make a few adjustments, but basically the plan was this. The confrontation would happen when Sarah returned on Sunday. The plan was quite simple. Within a week, I would settle all financial issues and discuss the details with a lawyer as soon as possible. I am continuing to live with her for the rest of the week, but I am canceling my volunteer participation on the track team for the weekend. As soon as she leaves on Friday, I start packing my things. I'll finish everything on Saturday, and the truck from the van rental company will arrive by noon. 3 of my friends will help me load my things and move into a furnished apartment near work. Before we parted, Rachel took my hands and looked into my eyes. "Jay, I'm coming back from the competition late Saturday night and wanted to stop by before I pick up my little girl from the babysitter on Sunday morning. This is going to be a hard night for you, and I think you're going to need someone to be there for you. I'll be honest and say that I'm really sorry you're breaking up with Sarah. I never want to see any marriage fail. However, if one of the parties cannot or does not want to fulfill their vows, then there is no other option but divorce. I also have to be honest with you. I loved you when we were teenagers and believed that one day we would get married. That's why I easily gave you my virginity and didn't regret it for a second. It took a long time, but somehow I was able to suppress my feelings, and finally, after a year, I opened up to Mark. He was kind and gentle, and everything went slowly, but in the end, I accepted him instead of you. He was very good to me, and when he was killed in Iraq, I was devastated, and my pregnancy only made it worse. I think I came back here with a vague hope that you might be free, and now it looks like you will be free. Whether you're looking for just a comrade, a friend with benefits, or perhaps something more serious, I'm here for you. I still love you." Tears welled up in my eyes. I brought her hands to my lips and kissed them. "Rachel, you know that you were my first love, and I think I never forgot you and always kept that love in a special place in my heart. Just as you loved Mark, so I loved Sarah until she killed that love. I'm so glad you're here and can't wait to see where our relationship takes us. We've got some tough weeks ahead, but after that I'm looking forward to what's next." My moving plan went without a hitch, and with the help of my friends, I left the house by 1 p.m. on Saturday. It didn't take me long to move into a furnished apartment since most of my things went into storage. By 6 o'clock, I already had Wi-Fi working, bed linens were on the bed, and cable TV and the internet were connected. My friends and I went to a local restaurant, where we secured a seat at the bar for a considerable time. I think we drank beer and ate pizza, but I don't remember much from that evening. One day I got home and my friends called an Uber. I fell asleep passed out in the chair and slept until I heard a knock on the door. It was Rachel, still in her tracksuit and looking great. As soon as she walked in, she quickly realized that I was not in the best shape and that I looked and smelled very bad. One day she made me take off my clothes and get into the shower, but all I could do was lean against the wall and let the water run down my head. Suddenly she was in the shower with me, clearly naked, a wonderful vision with shampoo and shower gel in her hands. She soaped me up, and as she did so, I sobered up enough to appreciate the tall, sexy woman who was caressing my body. Rachel was a pretty girl in high school with a skinny teenage look. Somehow we both managed to clean ourselves before the hot water ran out. Even drunk, it was a surprisingly sensual experience, with all the important parts of our body being lathered repeatedly. Luckily, a box of towels was handy, and we were able to dry off and snuggle into bed together without falling. Of course, we rekindled our relationship, but the passion of the moment was unexpectedly less important than the feeling of complete intimacy we felt. We were good friends, and now we were going to be so much more. We slept hugging each other, and Sunday morning brought us even more joy. We made love at least 3 more times before hunger forced us to put on our clothes and head to the nearest IHOP for breakfast, where we ordered double pancakes, lots of coffee, and sausages. Rachel left the restaurant and picked up Megan from the babysitter, and I later met them at her apartment after grocery shopping. We spent the day at the zoo while Sarah was served with her divorce notice. I turned off my phone and had a wonderful time riding the zoo train with my new favorite girls. Rachel and I couldn't keep our hands off each other as we walked around the zoo, which made her daughter ask me if I would be her mom's boyfriend. Rachel replied, "I sure hope so, Megan dear." Sarah. My drive home on I-57 was easy as there was little traffic on Sunday, and I had plenty of time to reflect and then vow again to be the best wife I could be. As I pulled up to our apartment complex, I mentally rehearsed how best to approach my husband. I was surprised when I pulled up to our house and found that the driveway was so full that I had to park on the street. I parked and walked inside, passing a new BMW, a sheriff's car, and a plain blue Chevrolet. I stopped, puzzled, at the front door, and finding that it was unlocked, I entered. I was stunned to see a group of strangers in my living room. My first reaction was to try to leave, but a well-dressed woman just inside the door stopped me, saying, "Mrs. Talbot, my name is Melissa Andrews. I am the attorney representing your husband Jeffrey, or Jay. Would you please come into the living room to talk?" With these words, she gently took me by the elbow and led me to the sofa. "Please sit down, Mrs. Talbot. Let me introduce you to Deputy Connors and my deputy, Miles Peterson." With this performance, my marriage ended. As I sat there silently, Jay's lawyer had a sheriff's deputy serve me with divorce papers and a restraining order. The lawyer then announced the court schedule and handed me her business card and the card of her assistant, whom I was to contact with any questions. She then launched into an apparently prepared explanation of what was happening. "Mrs. Talbot, I was hired by your husband to handle this case. Your apparent infidelity with Eric Paulson led to this meeting. One of the documents in the package you were just given are copies of all your texts and emails regarding your extramarital affair with the aforementioned Eric Paulson. They were found on the family computer. A recent addition to the package is camera footage from the Oak Park hotel room where you and Eric Paulson spent last night. These pictures were taken by cameras installed by a registered private investigator hired by Mrs. Paulson to gather evidence of her husband's infidelity with you and at least 3 other women. The evidence gathered indicates that you were involved in a 2-month affair involving multiple sexual acts, secret meetings in Oak Park, and extensive sexual correspondence with Mr. Paulson. My client is convinced that your relationship has been irrevocably damaged by your actions, and that, therefore, the marriage must also be legally dissolved. Dr. Talbot moved out of the marital home entirely and took with him only those items of personal property that he brought into the marriage. Your personal belongings and all items acquired as joint property during the marriage are kept. Dr. Talbot assesses his interest in the property based on the terms of the division of the property. As you know, 2 years ago, you purchased this property with a down payment of $50,000 from Dr. Talbot's funds, which I understand was an inheritance from a deceased grandfather. You are expected to assume the remainder of the mortgage and ownership of the property. The doctor is ready to give you this down payment and any other profits accumulated since then. This transfer of capital, of course, will be in lieu of alimony. My client believes that you are well enough employed in the school system that you will be able to easily handle the remaining mortgage payments on your own. In addition, my client will waive all claims to your pension plan if you waive your claims to his. It goes without saying that all credit card and bank account relationships are terminated as of today. You both drive cars in your names, and the relationship remains the same. Your husband also wrote you a short note that I should read to you. Dear Sarah, I fell hopelessly in love with you on the short journey from my sophomore English literature course to the Union. For the next 9 years, I was absolutely and completely faithful to you. I didn't care about your past, and I never gave you a reason to worry about mine. I only cared about the present and the future. Now you have destroyed any possibility of moving forward and building a family. However, don't despair, you still have Eric, his wife, and his 3 mistresses. I would suggest you get tested for styes. I've already been tested. Your ex-husband, Jay. The lawyer paused for a moment and then continued. For your convenience, I have prepared a written copy of my statement and I have handed it to you. Do you have any questions? I sat silently listening to my life being completely destroyed, and all I could do was cry and accept my punishment. I couldn't scream and hysterically deny because I was at fault and had actually been very generously forgiven by James. Before Jay's lawyer left, I signed the divorce papers so they could be filed in court. She asked if I wanted my lawyer to review the documents, and I said no. Jay has always been an honest man, and given what I did to him and to our marriage, he was incredibly generous. The only thing I asked for was a personal meeting before the final court date. 5 years later. Jay. The Saturday morning sun brightly illuminated the golden curves of her beautiful, sleeping, naked body. Despite our activity the previous evening, it looked and smelled fresh and clean. I love you, husband. And I love you, wife. 5 more years later. Rachel and I were sitting at the Palmer House restaurant enjoying a romantic dinner as part of a long weekend in Chicago. We were celebrating our 10th anniversary of marriage and my recent promotion to vice president and director at the Institute. The children were with my parents in River Forest, where they were pampered to distraction, while I tried to do the same with their daughter-in-law. We were in that blissfully relaxed state that a couple can achieve after 3 acts of love in the morning, a swim in the jacuzzi, and the consumption of 1.5 bottles of nice Merlot. As I looked behind Rachel, I suddenly realized that my ex-wife, dressed to the nines, was entering the hall, accompanied by an elegantly dressed older man. This was the first time in many years that I saw her. As they passed our table, I said, "Good evening, Sarah." The woman looked at me with a blank expression and replied, "Sir, you must be confusing me with someone. My name is not Sarah." With these words, the couple moved on and sat down at a table quite far from ours. I only saw her for a moment, but it was definitely her, Rachel said. It was her. I dated her for 3 years and was married for 7 years, so I think I would recognize my ex. She must have had a reason for not wanting to confess. Sarah. Of course it was Jay and the woman who replaced me. How could I not recognize the only man I've ever truly loved? The golden boy of the University Research Center and his wife, the miracle coach of the women's track team. Over the years, I have encountered many people from my past life and have perfected the blank stare and evasive response. When we were seated, my companion asked, "I was sure Claudia told me your name was Sharon. Was I wrong?" "Of course not, John. My sister worked here as a hostess, and we are very similar. We often get confused with each other. Even though I'm 2 inches taller, we wear the same hairstyles. But enough about me. Claudia told me you're a rising star at Consolidated. She said you're the one with the best sales in the last decade. And if I can add my 2 cents, you're also a real looker." With these flattering words and the waiter taking my drink order, I leaned forward so he could peer into my cleavage, and the question of my name quickly disappeared. I worked this routine to perfection, from showing off the cleavage to the leg under the table slowly sliding up the man's leg. Just a few minutes later, the ice was broken, and my companion was already looking forward to a more intimate after-dinner drink. This consolidated guy turned out to be quite a skilled lover. A quick fuck when we got to the room, and then a much longer and more enjoyable session in and around the jacuzzi. Relaxed and satisfied, I left him at 1:30 a.m. and called an Uber to my apartment. On the way, I checked the schedule for tomorrow and was pleased to notice that one of my favorites was in town at the Arlington races in the afternoon, and for dinner that evening. As I fell asleep later that night, I reflected on my life after Jay. The divorce and subsequent months were difficult. It was entirely my fault, caused by almost uncontrollable sexual impulses. I wanted to be a loving and faithful wife, but it felt so damn good to have sex outside of marriage. Deep down, I knew I couldn't remain a good school administrator, so at the end of the school year, I sold my house, quit my job, and moved back to Chicago. I lived for a while with my old friend Mary Beth Adams, who was still looking for her perfect man, and we went to bars several times a week. Finding a man was easy, leading to a few carnal experiences, some average sex, and an awkward infection. The solution to my problems came from an unexpected source. While I was looking for a full-time job, I worked temporarily for an agency that handled a lot of the trade shows at McCormick Place. I was assigned to a demonstration, and the agency liked me so much that they gave my number to the escort agency. Long story short, I got into sex work and fell in love with it. Within 2 years, I had risen to the top of my profession in the escort market in Chicago. I worked lightly 4 to 5 nights a week for about 40 weeks a year. Every fourth week, I took a vacation, relaxed in the sun, took a young lover, and relaxed. I was more emotionally, physically, and financially fulfilled than I had ever been in my life. Financially, I was doing very, very well. One of my regular clients was trading financial advice and help for the kind of sex his wife couldn't provide. He helped me create alternate identities and offshore accounts and money laundering schemes to provide me with credible tax returns. Within a few years, I reached multimillionaire status doing what I love most. Sure, I had a few unexpected unfortunate incidents, but my escort service had a GPS panic button ready that would summon a burly security guard within 5 minutes at any hotel on the Gold Coast. 3 times in 9 years, I took advantage of this, and each time I avoided harm, unlike my aggressors, who then received serious injuries and a lifetime ban from the agency's services. Now that I'm almost 39 years old, my only real regret is that I don't have intimate relationships in a good marriage. It's not that I don't have offers. One of my regular clients offered to rent an apartment and pay me a monthly allowance. I always refused. A few special men even proposed marriage to me, but when I told them that I wanted to continue dating other men from time to time, they backed down. However, there was one special person who started booking me every 2 weeks. He was the CEO of a large Fortune 100 company headquartered here in Chicago. He lived on the West Coast, but flew to Chicago for a few days every 2 weeks for meetings. He showered me with expensive gifts, and Claudia recently told me that he wants to book me permanently for $10,000 a week. I'm seriously thinking about his proposal. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to